Hello, everyone, and welcome to Azure Back to School session with Elhan. I'm very glad to actually be part of this great event, and today we are going to look into a different way how to bring infrastructure as code and automation into your provisioning of Azure resource and how to manage them. But before diving too far here, I want to first thank the organizers of this Azure Back to School event. As you know, Dwayne has been doing that for years, and Derek is helping him this year for organizing. So, big shout out for Derek and Dwayne for doing this event. And thank you every viewer and every presenter who is taking part in this event, trying to learn in the process and watch those wonderful videos created by community for the community use and for everyone who is trying to learn about Azure. Before diving too far here, I want to actually bring this Azure Back to School webpage. As you see, you may probably already know that, but here are the event web page. I had two submissions and thank you for accepting them. So this is the second one which I'm going to show, but there are different topics here, starting from Azure Service Bus, how to get certified, and how to use AI and Azure Percept. So please check them out when you get more time and you can watch them to upskill yourself. All right, that's it. Again, let's continue with our session here. And again, thank you for joining this session. Now, this is a little bit information about myself. I'm not going to stay too much here, but what I would just recommend is please go and check this URL here. Let me make sure that that URL is actually highlighted. Yeah, so this URL here that you see in the, I, okay, let me look at it once more. This is the link tree which I'm going to open. There are all the social connections that you can get connected with me. I'm part of the Microsoft Azure MVP family and have been nominated and awarded for that. But I'm sharing my ideas and overall cloud journey on the blog called thecloudmarathoner.com. I have the hashtag cloud marathoner. So please follow that and be in the loop of all these new events that's happening. And keep in mind, next month, October, we're having Microsoft Ignite event, which is going to be big. And there would be a lot of upskilling initiatives there, including some certification initiatives that you can take part and basically get to the next level in your professional career. All right, that said, let's come back to the session in terms of what is new in Azure Bicep language. And what we will cover today is actually we'll go through different set of events with intertwined with the demos inside. So we'll have demo slides. And first we'll start with explaining what is Azure Bicep. Then we'll look into the how you can set up a development environment or what type of environment you need to set up in order to get started with Azure Bicep. And once you get started with that, it's a good idea to look into what were the updates in Azure Bicep if you have been doing that, let's say, from the beginning of year and you have some skills. So you want to know what were the updates and how you can incorporate those productivity tips into your day-to-day work. Then we will look into those new features. In addition to updates, there were new features on Visual Studio Code Bicep extension that make your life much easier in terms of managing those Bicep language code. And then we will look into a number of demos. And at the end, if we get enough time, I'm going to show you how you can automate a deployment of your Azure Bicep code into the desired Azure subscription and how you can use GitHub workflow actions to do that. All right, so first thing first, what is Azure Bicep? Azure Bicep is a new domain-specific language, DSL, and that transpiles Azure Bicep code into ARM templates. That's what it is. So it's first of all, it's a new domain specific language, DSL. Next is it's transparent abstraction over ARM. ARM is the Azure Resource Manager layer, and what Azure Bicep team did is actually they introduced a way that you can easily and cleanly declare your Azure resources so that you can manage them in a way that is close to the infrastructure as a code. Next, as we mentioned, it's much clean way to create and manage those Azure resources. If you compare that with ARM, for example, ARM JSON, ARM JSON wasn't supposed to be language. It is just a declaration in JSON language. And, it was basically intended for the machines in order to talk to each other and understand the configuration of your Azure resources. But with Azure Bicep, which is actually abstraction on top of ARM, is actually it looks and feels more like a language, and it has much easier constructs, language like programming language like construct that you can define your Azure resources and manage them. Finally, it's all connected to ARM, Azure Resource Manager, and you can compile your Bicep language code into ARM templates, which means that anything that you can do with anything that you can do with ARM templates, you can also do by Bicep language. And this new language aims to make again easier to write infrastructure as a code for developers and DevOps engineers that typically create those Azure infrastructure code targeting the Azure Resource Manager APIs. All right, next is if we compare Azure Bicep language ARM templates we talked about, but this actual diagram from uh, from the Microsoft Docs actually make it pretty easy to understand. So as you see, Bicep language is an abstraction over Azure Resource Manager ARM template, and you can compile this into ARM templates. You can always compile to ARM templates, and of course, ARM templates are sent into the Azure Resource Manager layer where authentication and authorization actually happens, and then based how you declare your resources, these different resources in Azure, like Azure Arc, your web apps, storage account, virtual machines, you name it, those resources get provisioned. And as you see, Azure Resource Manager layer is very important, and you can use different clients like Azure Portal. It can be APIs that you can interact with that. Okay, that said, now let's look into the benefits, why you want to invest your time and get proficient with Bicep language, right? Because before doing these investments, you need to have a good understanding what actually uh, what are the benefits. So I will list out 10 benefits here that will hopefully convince you to give the another look to Azure Bicep language if you didn't, for example, if you were not thrilled using the ARM templates because of the complexity that it had and a steep learning curve, then Bicep language would be very lucrative for you. For example, so let's start with those benefits. First, it's easy to understand and maintain, and I will show you example right after this slide that would demonstrate that. Then it has day zero support, meaning that whatever you develop in Bicep language, and same is true for Azure ARM templates. They are using right away the APIs, Azure ARM template, Azure ARM APIs in order to talk to the resources and get the latest features. So that's why if there's a new updated feature or new update on Azure resource, you can utilize that feature right away without waiting for any update on the Bicep language internals or Bicep language code. Next, it's a transparent abstraction. We looked into that, how it looks. Then it has awesome tooling in Visual Studio Code, including Azure Bicep extension that we will look into. It's a clean code syntax, meaning that once you look at that and you have a little bit of programming background, it will feel very intuitive. It will feel clean and easy to understand and develop. Next, it comes with reusability and simpler modularity that you can use. You had some ways to do that with ARM templates as well in a nested way, but that was not easy to manage. So code reuse in and modules in Azure Bicep are the next level, and it's very easy to compile your desired infrastructure, Azure infrastructure based on those different modules that are compliant with your company's policies that so you can reuse those modules. Then it has deep integration with Azure because of this day zero support, sorry. And then you have pre-flight validation, meaning that you can, before deploying your resources into Azure environment, into your resource group or subscription, you actually have the means to check your uh, to check your to check your code, and that code and the state of your um, provisioning, of course, is going to change certain resources, add or update certain resources in Azure environment where you are deploying. This pre-flight validation, you can be sure that your deployment is not going to fail in the middle. And if there's anything that's wrong with the syntax or with the way how you are deploying those resources, those things are going to be you will get the warning, and you will get the chance to correct the issue before deploying your Azure infrastructure. That's really neat feature, and you can have this pre-flight validation not just on Azure Bicep, but you can also have similar functionality on Azure ARM templates when you use PowerShell or Azure CLI languages to do those deployments. Then it comes with no state file management, no state management file that you have to worry. As you know, some third-party infrastructure as a code tools are requiring state file in order to manage the state of the Azure or cloud resources that you are deploying, and then you are trying to update later on. With Azure, you don't have to deal with that. Basically, the Azure ecosystem itself is a multi-billion-dollar state machine that tracks all your change, and using the Azure PowerShell or Azure CLI, you can easily make this pre-flight validation checks, which is in a way that verifies that what is the state of your deployed files and what type of change you would select. But you don't have to maintain it on a separate file. It's built in, so to speak, through the functionality. Next is you are getting the production support that has been there from version 0.3. So if there's any issues with Bicep language deployment, or you see something that is broken in a way, you can always open an official Microsoft Office ticket, or you can also go to the Azure Bicep GitHub repo. There's a discussion where often developers, DevOps people are actually putting the request, and you can, also put your ticket or look into those previous requests. Maybe you have an answer there. And again, for that thing, you want to check the GitHub Azure Bicep. All right, and you will have the URL at the end of this session. All right, that said, let's look at the example, right? So we talked about it, but it would be good to have a look. Now we are going to switch to the Visual Studio Code. So here we are. We are in a Visual Studio Code, and by the way, all these files, all these folders, the samples that you see on this demonstration, on this presentation, are all in GitHub. And let me switch here and show where you can get them. So this is basically the GitHub URL that you can use here on the top left, sorry. And here, if you scroll down, you would see that we have here a Learn Bicep repo that has been here publicly available for everyone. So you just need to click there. And once you are in that repo, you would see that you have different uh, information here, but the main purpose how you can get started are all laid out in this project. In this case, for example, the modules that I'm going to use are located here. And you have also sample codes, which is using those modules. The sample deployments of for different resources are located here. So this is the way you want to look. All right. And that's it. This is the URL where you can get all of them, kind of URL to rule all the information that I'm going to show you here. Most of it is all here. So please check it out and get connected. Okay, let me go back here to our demonstration. So what we are going to do now, we are going to look into a Bicep file. So it's a minimum storage. Here's the name. It's a minimum storage because we have just simple vanilla storage here. And what I have here is just declaration of the resource. I have the name, which is storage account. Then you have this resource type, which is the storage account, and this is the API. And then you have a name and other things. So by default, if you install this, if you are using the Visual Studio Code, which you can actually also use the Visual Studio now because it also has a support there. What we're gonna do now is we are going to look into different ways how you can actually why this Azure Bicep language is much easier to understand and manage than, let's say, um, your Azure ARM template, right? So here we are going to do some actually, we have some squiggly lines. This is coming from the Bicep config file, which we are going to cover today. So if you get the squiggly line, it usually says that it's a good idea to move it to the parameter. If you want to move it to parameter, you just go and declare your parameter as a region. You can define it as a string, and then we just move this into this parameter by adding it there and then making sure that our location is defined through the parameter, which is going to be the something that derived from the resource group location where we deploy our um, storage account. So here we have declaration of storage account. We have the region. It's a standard locally redundant skew, meaning that it's going to be in the one region and it's locally redundant and copy it into 3 different places within the same region, and it has some tags. So if you want to see how it will look like in how it will look like as an Azure ARM template, then you can actually type AZ Bicep. For example, here we installed the Azure CLI and Bicep. And if it is installed, or let's say you want to know how to install that, then you want to check a Azure Bicep repo that I send you. It has instructions how to install it. So once you install Azure Bicep through CLI, which is command line interface, you can type Azure Bicep version, and it should tell you, what version of Azure Bicep we have on the local machine. So this is version 0.10. We'll look into versioning. Next, if you want to build this file uh, into JSON representation, this minimum storage, we just type az bicep and then we have a build command. And then we need to define the file location, which is located under the modules. And the name is minimum storage. So once we press on enter here, what will happen is this minimum storage.bicep file will get compiled into ARM template, into JSON file. And of course, because I have a linter configuration, it will apply certain things there, but we'll look into that. So here on the right side, once we run this command, you see that we have a new file, minimum-storage JSON. So if you click on that, you would see that this is the basically, this is the representation of the same Bicep file of that storage account in ARM templates. So to make it easier to see, what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare this with minimum storage. As you see, and let me take out this panel on the right. As you see, it's declaring the parameter first, but before parameters, it's a JSON schema where we need to have a schema. it has a metadata that indicates how this file was generated. It used the Bicep language compiler, and then it used actually the version that's here with the hash. So this is about metadata. Next, we have a parameter declaration here for the region, which is declared here, and this is the default value that's part of this parameter because I have a value here. And finally, we have the resource declaration with the type of the resource. In our case, it's declared here in one line. Then we have the API version, which should match the same API version that we have here. And then we have the name, which should be the same name. And then we have location parameter and the tags. As you see here on the left side, we have 16 lines of code, but here on the right, we have such almost double the lines of the code, because this on the right side, again, we have a JSON declaration of the ARM template, but on the left side, we have the abstraction on top of it, which means that we have a language that easily easily defines the resource that we want to have. Now, let's switch back to the slides again now. Okay. So what we looked here, we looked into how to parameterize things, how a simple storage account will look like, and what it looks like when you build it using the template. But there is another way to build this as well. Okay, let me actually remove this from here, delete, because we don't need it for this moment. So we have only this minimum. So another way actually that you can use without using the terminal, in our case, I use the terminal to build that file, is if you have this extension, and I will type the extension name here, Bicep extension. Okay, if you have a Bicep extension installed and it's enabled, it will give you a number of good validation, and as well as different IntelliSense in order to make your work go easier and much better. So, for example, let's look at it here. Uh, I'm going to switch and right click here on the file, okay, and say here, once you right click, you will see that there's a build ARM template is an option that you can use. So let's click on it. And as you see here, we get this option that it's building the file and it succeeded. So once it's built through the right click, you'll see that same file will appear here again. So that's another way that you can use in order to build ARM templates from your JSON code. All right, so this is another way that you can use. All right, let me remove this. Yeah, there's a little bit, you may hear a little bit background noise. Hopefully you don't get much of it. There is some mowers actually outside, so sorry for that. Any uh, audio disruptions that you may hear, but hopefully it's not getting there. Okay, so that said, I'm going to go back to the slides, and here we see the evolution of the Azure Bicep over from the end of 2020 when it was actually announced as alpha and where it is now. So it started as an alpha version in 2020. I believe it was an Ignite event when it was announced. And then fast forward with the version 0.3, with the version 0.3, what we get is basically we get the actual official support for this Azure Bicep language. And then fast forward, now it's 2022, and before another Ignite, now we have a version 0.10. But it is not a stable version 1.0 yet, because there is still certain developments that's going on with Azure Bicep community. And once it reached that maturity level, that version 1 will be, there. So that said, here I want to show you how you can actually run these commands in order to get some understanding about Azure Bicep command line interface, and that would be a good. And then we'll look into some resources that you can use in order to learn more about Azure Bicep, and we'll dive into some demos. All right. So So let's look at that now. Let's switch back to our Visual Studio Code. And here I'm going to put it on a full mode here, and we'll go to the terminal and we'll clean everything. So here with Azure Bicep, it's actually have very few command line um, commands that you can use. So first of all, you type Azure Bicep and you can type dash dash help. That's the way to invoke what's inside Azure Bicep. And here you will see that you have a number of commands, but it is less than a dozen, right? So we have a couple of them here. First, if you want to build your ARM templates, you can always use the build command. You can decompile your existing ARM templates into Bicep. This is auto-generated, so it's not going to be the perfect from the first try, but you can always go and refactor that in a way that you want that to be looking. So you can generate parameters, and we will look into that option from your Bicep file. Those generated parameters are actually going to have the JSON structure. Currently, Azure Bicep team is working on a way how you can define your parameters using the Bicep language notation and syntax. But again, these auto-generate parameters under the hood is using the JSON representation. So we'll look at, you can also install Bicep CLI if you don't have it yet. Uh, if you are running that on Azure CLI, which is Azure Command Line Interface. We looked into versioning right now, and there's also, you can publish, restore, uninstall, upgrade, and look at the version of this CLI file. So there's a handful of them. You can try them and see how it works. Here's another kind of tip here. If there's a new version of Azure Bicep that you installed and you get some funky results, you can always go and uninstall it, and you can install the prior version that you are sure that you are getting a right compilation. That happened once to me. I blogged about it, so keep that in mind. Sometimes it's good to know ahead. All right, that said, we put that here. Next thing is we're gonna go back to our presentation file here. So Bicep development environment. So with Bicep development environment, you need to keep in mind that there are a few things. First of all, you need to make sure that your Azure CLI version is 2.20 or latest one. That's required in order to be able to run those different ways and install your Azure Bicep from Azure CLI. So just make sure you have latest one. It's going to be above 2.20. I'm pretty sure on that. So next is you want to have a Azure PowerShell installed, which has the version for 5.6 or above, or even better, if you have a PowerShell core that's going to be able to run your Bicep code and Bicep commands. Um, Next is actually, let's look into a demo here. But before diving into demo, let me show you this awesome Azure Bicep. You will get the link, which is actually located here in the repo. I'm navigating to that repo now, which is awesome Azure Bicep repo here. I'm going to click on it. And what it is basically a list of official and community resources that will help you learn Microsoft Azure Bicep language and how to use it. So you have these official Microsoft Learn modules that you can actually go ahead and try them one by one and learn fundamentals fundamentals up to the advanced concepts that can be useful. Then you can, of course, look at some videos that are provided here. And then there are community-powered videos and community-powered information that you can look here and get those information into your belt, so that you know um, what are the commonly used information that you can have. Okay, so this is the source, a great source driven by community to learn about Azure Bicep and what type of awesome things you can do with that. All right. So now, next thing is actually, before diving, let's navigate and look into some build and deploy features on Visual Studio Code. So here, let me actually come back here and put it down. So next, we are going to look into App Service Bicep. This is another uh, Bicep code that's located under the modules here. So what we have here is, it might be a little bit frustrating. I would say frustrating, but it's a bit hard in the beginning to look at existing code and trying to figure out what is where and what it means. But this is the same Azure Bicep language, but it is decorated with some um, language features. Like we have a description for each parameter here, and then we have uh, app service plan. And once that app service plan is defined, we have the actual uh, application web app service, web app itself, app service app, which is basically web app that's using the service plan. Okay, that's what it is. But if this thing is a bit, when the number of lines actually grows exponentially, then the best way is to use the modules, right? You want to make sure you can reuse the code. But before diving into reusing the code, let me show you in Bicep Visualizer. This is the very helpful feature that's coming with Bicep extension that I just show you. So you just click on it, and here on the right panel, you would get some visualization. So this visualization shows us that for this code on the left, we have app service plan, and this app service plan is used by our web app or app service app that we have here on the right. So that will give you idea what are the resources that get provisioned from this Visual Studio Code. Now, we have this here, which is great, okay, but it would be even better if we can look into parameters. So here in parameters, as you see, we have already some default values, which are optional. If you don't want to have them, this is perfectly fine. You can always right click and you can actually, disable those, but they are really handful. They are really handy when you actually want to just take the file and deploy it with some pre-generated default values. Okay, so you can always take them out, and the difference is, once you don't have them and you are deploying the file, you are going to be asked for those parameters. That's the only difference. And okay, so for this file, app service.bicep, if you want to have a separate parameter file where you want to get these parameters, you can always add them. You can manually add them, or you can right click and say, hey, go ahead and generate parameter files for me by using this handy feature, or you can use the bicep command as well. But at the end, it's going to generate this under the app service bicep. It will generate app service parameter JSON file here, right under it, and that would have all these three parameters for location, app service app name, and the plan name that are part of this deployment file. Okay, so here it's all good, but what is the easy way to deploy this, right? Let's say we want to deploy this into existing Azure environment. So how it will work? So if you want to deploy that, there are a couple options again. First, of course, I'm going to actually bring back this default um, default values for my three parameters that I have for this. And next is actually, if you want to deploy that, there are different ways you can do that. I'm going to show you actually, there are two ways, right? So first way how you can deploy is, you can go ahead and use the Azure Bicep command line interface. To do that, what you would need to do. Let's say we want to deploy our file. First, we want to create actually, let's look at our resource groups. To get the list of our resource group, we just need to make sure that we run this command. But before running that command, let's make sure that we are connected to the subscription. I run this command, AZ account show query name, and tells yes, you have a subscription here, which is good. So next, I'm going to list all the resource groups that I have under that subscription to make sure that I know what's the number and what are the, oh, I made a typo here. Let me correct my typo. So we need to type AZ group list, then O stands for output, and it will be nicely formatted output in table. If you don't put, you'll just get the JSON that you have to scroll down and understand. So we have 4 resource groups here, which is awesome. Let's create a new one. To create a new resource group, we'll just have to define it. So we can type always AZ group, which stands for creating those groups, and then we can create one in a location, let's say East US, and we want that to have a name, resource group, Azure back to school, right? This is and dash 2022. Okay, so let's create this resource group. So while this resource group is getting created, it should be here. So let's actually look that it is listed in our group. Yes, it's here, as you see on the list of the Azure groups. So once this here, you can also go and check it on your actual. This is the Azure portal that's using the same subscription. So I'm going just to click on refresh, and here you go. We have this Azure resource group, and it's pretty much empty. We don't have anything there. What we want to do now, we are going to make our first deployment of app service Bicep. And as you saw here, we have 2 resources. We have app, we'll deploy the application source plan and then the web app itself. And it should give us the, this is output, that's going to be the URL of our web app. Okay, so to do that, let's do this deployment to our, so if you get lost somewhere, there are scripts here. I'm actually looking into them to make sure I don't finger type or anything. So you can use the script. There are a lot of examples you can use. So to deploy that into the resource group that we just created, we need to make the following. We need to use the AZ deployment, and then we would use the group. And in order to create this deployment, we need to define the resource group. So in our case, the resource group is here. We just created that, so let's put it there. And we want to use the quotes because if there's this actual dash or something, it's usually helpful. Next, actually, we want to define the file where it is located. So in our case, it's in the modules, and this actual name is app service. So we'll type app service.bicep, and I use the tab on my keyboard just to make sure it comes much faster. And then if you remember, we were talking about pre-flight validation, right, as one of the advantages of using Bicep. So we are putting -c there at the end. This is going to be our pre-flight validation to make sure that what we are deploying is not going to break. It's not going to fail in the middle of the deployment. So to do that, we're just pressing enter here on our keyboard, and we will wait that to get provisioned. So it's using the bicep config file, which will come back right after this one. And we can go back here and refresh, so nothing here, as you see. This is our Azure portal. So here we go. That's good. So we get some responses here saying that, hey, we're gonna create two files. One of them is my app plan for service farm, and then which is basically your ASP, your application service plan, and this is the web app that will have this my app, and then this auto-generated uh, uh, auto-generated text that we have after my app. Okay, let's say we want to generate these two resources and we choose Y, which is yes, and now actual deployment will happen. So if you go back, you will see that's still nothing here. But here's if you are very familiar with Azure, probably you know that. But if you never use that, you know that here in Azure Resource Group, you can also have a setting for deployments here, the one that you see under the settings. You can always click on it and look at the deployments that happen on this resource group. And if you refresh this, it says succeeded. Okay, now we can go to overview, again, same resource group, and we're gonna refresh it. And now we see that one of the resources appeared. We're gonna refresh it once more. It's still coming. So keep in mind that there's usually a delay once the resource is actually provisioned. They do not appear right away on Azure portal. It takes a few seconds in order to make sure those resources are here. So as we see, they are both here. And here, as a result of deployment, if we succeeded, we should get this success message. And we already validated our resources are deployed. That's great. So this is the first deployment using from our Azure Bicep code into right away into the Azure subscription and the resource group that we have. So now once we have this deployment and everything set it up, next is if you have actually LinkedIn access, you can also use this course called Azure Bicep First Look video course that where I'm actually I was um, offered to create this course for LinkedIn Learning. So if you want to start your exploration of Azure Bicep and you want to start from the beginning, right, from the fundamentals, this is the course to look into. So please check it out when you get a time. Next is a Visual Studio Code and Bicep configurations file. So if you remember that yellow squiggly information reminding us about this linting configuration rules, this is the thing we are talking here now. So we'll look into what is Bicep config file, why you need them, and how those analyzers, those linting rules are organized, and what are the default configuration rules that you can actually use. So to do that, let's switch back to our Visual Studio Code again. And here, once we switch here, I will scroll down to the bicep config file JSON. So this is where it is. So depending where you put them into the specific folder, or you put it on a root of your project, it will apply from the place where it is. So in my case, as you see, this is the analyzer and this is the core. You also have some, these are the private registries you can use, but this is not the topic of our presentation today. So if you look at this, these are the basically, linting rules that you can enable or disable. So in terms of your choices, as you see in these levels, you have four choices. You can error them, meaning you want to stop deployment or build process from succeeding if there is a rule that's get violated. You can also record that. You can put the warning, which will just have this yellow squiggle line, or you can turn it off by selecting off here, right? So in our case, I'm going to still keep the warning here. So in order to get to see, what's the difference here, let's switch to the file for deploying the child parent resources, and then we'll get into that. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to switch to the file here under the samples. You have 14 deployed child parent. So this again, let me make it clear. So under the samples folder, you'll have this file. And in this file, as you see, Let's see, do we have any linting rule? No, nothing. So here I'm going to do the following. I'm going to create a parameter, but it's not going to be used anyway. Param uh, not used, and it's going to be, let's say, a string, and it will have no value. It has no value whatsoever. So here, as you see, it's a yellow squiggly line because we have this rule saying that check for unused parameters, right? So it's declared but never used. So if you wanna make sure that if you have this actual if we have this in our code as a team, we want to make sure we don't have such parameters. So if that's the case, then you need to scroll down to your Bicep config file and no unused parameters. So in this case, it's warning, but you can change that. And let's say you want to give an error because this is something annoying and you don't want to have in your Bicep code. So if we change this, we're going to switch back to our 14, and here you have an error. Okay, so what's the difference? So when you have warnings, you will be still able to compile and do everything fine. But now let's save this and give an experiment. We're gonna compile this into ARM template. Let's see, would that allow us? So let's right click and say deploy, not the deploy, but here in our case, we want to build ARM template. And as you see, it didn't succeed. We didn't get JSON file because we have an error here that's based on the linting rule saying, okay, there's error, unused parameter. You need to fix that first before going forward. So to do that, it's pretty easy fix in our case, but that's something that you want to keep in mind when you're dealing with those type of errors. So keep in mind that there's a somewhere you have a config Bicep config that needs to be updated. So let's put it back to warning. And of course, this is not the only default rules you have here. You can add some more. For example, here, if you want to add another rule, you can see the list. You have maximum number of parameters you can define, maximum number of resources within the file, and then uh, you can define how you want to use your recent API. Do you want to make sure you use the recent, all the recent API versions, or what are the security and protection means you want to have that are all listed here? Again, you can look at all these linting rules on official website, but they are all here for you if you want to up your game, or if you want to apply some organizational, again, standards that you have for your infrastructure as a code environments. All right, that said, I'm going to go back to this file where we were, which is number 14. So here I'm going to remove this. If I don't remove it, now it's yellow, right? So let me go back to terminal here. I'm going to save it, but now it's on a warning. If you right click this time, you actually would not get error. What you get success in ARM template, but you get that warning still stays there. So if you go and click on the file under that bicep here, you get your JSON. Let me actually expand it. So this is our bicep file here. Let me zoom once more. Okay, here our bicep, and this is the ARM template compilation. So it succeeded, and you have the same, but there's the unused parameter there. So let me again discard that one. You have access to all these codes. They are all they're all declared in GitHub repo. Okay, so here what we're gonna do next is we want to deploy this child parent resource. So let's first look what it is. Okay, so in this file, if you don't understand what's going on, which is kind of okay because there's a number of things and a number of declarations. You can always use Bicep visualizer. Let's click on it and take this panel out. So as you see here on the right side, we have some visualization here. Let's make it bigger by scrolling in. And as you see, we have a storage account that's get created. Then you have storage services, blob services that has two containers created, internal container and my storage container. And then you have actually, this is very interesting. Here you have a containers array, right? So it's more than one container is going to be generated. So that's what this file is supposed to create. So in order to see that in action, what we are going to do is actually look at the code itself. So we have parameters and we have here another declaration of a list of container names, right? And this list of container names is actually used here in our in our uh, declaration of those container names as an option tree where we loop through those lists and we define it. But before that, we have an option 2 where we include that internal container as a child into our blob service that's using the same storage account. And yeah, we have an option 1 where we can actually define the uh, data log. That's the name of the container for the given blob service. Okay. So how we can actually see how it's working, let's give it a try and deploy it differently. So now what we are going to do, we are going to deploy this child parent scenario using the right click. That's a new feature, comparatively new feature in Azure Bicep. So to do that, we're going to right click on this file and say deploy Bicep file. It will ask us for subscription. So we select the subscription, then we need to select or create a new resource group. In our case, we can create a new resource group. We'll just have to give a name. Let's say resource group parent dash child. Okay, it will ask for the location. Let's keep East US. So now it created the resource group. It asks us, do you have any parameters? Because we have default parameters, we can skip and say, no, we don't want to include. Then this is actually, if you, this is one of the things that if you use as is, it will actually error on you. So here, if you want to use this, uh, this will not error out if you deploy using the command line that I did previously, but for this instance, you have to give the name actually. That's going to be entered. So here we need to give an actual name, BS27, unique SMB, and then let's put to 9/28 as today's date. Okay, so we put a bit different name. Then it's asked for the use value of the resource group. This is okay. This is the function. And then do we want to generate the parameter file? No, thank you. So here, once we put that there, let's look at the output here. It started deploying it. And to look into that, I'm going to switch back to Azure Portal. So here we will go back to the resource group. So we refresh it and we have resource group that has parent child, the one that we just created. And under this resource group, let's refresh it. So it seems like, let's look at deployments. Oh, it succeeded. That's great. So let's go back and refresh it once more. It will take some time. So before it's actually coming here on UI, let's go back here and see. Okay, it says deployment actually succeeded, which is good news for us. Let's go back to the, again, to our resource groups. Again, it may take a few seconds here and there to bring the, but here we go. We have actually this storage account and the same name that get deployed. Once we click on it, it's actually going to show us the containers. And these are the containers. If you remember, we have internal container, we have a list of container logs, outputs that are all here. So as you see, it deployed this parent-child relationship between storage accounts and how you can have this here. So that's awesome. So let's fast forward a little bit based on the time that we have. So next is I'm going to switch back again to the slides. And here we have some new features in Azure Bicep. Some of them we already saw on the demo, but let's go and listen. Uh, so we have Bicep public and private registries. That's set of new features. We have deploy a Bicep file from Visual Studio Code. We have Bicep visualizer. We have code snippets, and we have auto-generate parameters in Visual Studio Code, which we actually covered. So if you want that right-click deploy happen and it doesn't come up on your Visual Studio Code, this is the place you want to look. You want to go into the config and you want to find the Bicep and you want to enable that if it doesn't work for you. Hopefully by now it's actually working for you, and because that feature is going to be, it's actually Bicep team has been asked to put that as a default, but if it doesn't, this is the way where you can fix it. Okay, so next is actually let's look. We looked into Azure Bicep Visualizer, but there is another way that we can look into that. Okay, and that's I'm going to use a different. Let me bring it actually. So let's look at Bicep Visualizer in our Visual Studio Code from a different perspective. So here we have under samples. Let me bring it down. This one. Under samples, we have this file which actually use the modules. We talked about them, but we didn't show. So this is the way to see it. So if you want to see those files, they are all here, and it's using deployment of resources using the modules. So those modules are app service module that we just look. And as you see, declaration is looking like a resource, but it needs to have this link into where your Bicep file is, which is going to be treated as a module, as a reusable file. And of course, we have this string interpolation where we define the names. And if you get the squiggle lines, you can always, there's a way to fix it. Let's say sometimes you get these quick fixes that you can go, you can remove the quotes, and you can remove the quotes here. So it's okay. So it's good to go. In our case, we have storage resource group that get declared. We have a storage module, we have a Cosmos DB, and we have a number of other things. So if we go and look into Azure Bicep Visualizer, on the right side, you see these are the all resources that this file is deploying, and there's quite a number of them here, right? So we have Azure Cosmos DB, we have the storage group and we have different app service. Let me make it bigger. We have app service that get deployed here. We have a Windows virtual machine that get deployed with all the required components of virtual network, storage account, and network security group, and all the things that it needs to have in place. And then we have storage module and Cosmos DB module that get deployed. So this is pretty good. So we get some understanding, but the idea here is that you can also deploy your target scope as a subscription. Okay. And if you wonder how you can deploy this, here's the uh, on top of this file, I put the Azure CLI command that you can use, and it also comes with a parameter file that you can use. So in this case, for this file, 7 deploy modules, as you see, we have a number of parameters here. And if you go back and look into the parameters, let me bring that. So we have here param files for 7. These are the parameters that are defined here, and it's using Azure Key Vault for the password. So it's just using the secret name in order to retrieve that Azure Key Vault password and use for the password of the virtual machine. And all other parameters are defined here. All right. Okay, that said, now next thing we have here is demos that we already went through some. I'm going to just stop here a little bit and speak about how you can auto deploy using the GitHub workflow and actions that you have. So to do this, actually in Learn Bicep, I'm going to switch here for a second to the Visual Studio Code. Here in Learn Bicep module, you would see that we have a GitHub. workflows here on the left side. So if you go to the main deployment YAML, this is the file which has all the YAML actions and jobs that are defined here. But of course, you need to set up first your secrets in GitHub to make sure that you have an access to the Azure subscription and resource groups where you are deploying. But what it does is basically it's just takes the Bicep file, it compiles that into ARM JSON template, and then it deploys it to the resource group that's defined here based on the service principal that we provide the access. Okay, and it's going to deploy that through the main branch under the release, which means that in our case, it's going to be the in this deploy. So let's scroll down. Let's see here. So it's going to be, yes, deploy main.bicep. That's from where it's going to deploy. That's why in here in the deploy and the main bicep, this is the file that's it's going to be actually deployed. And what it has here is through bicep config, bicep visualizer, we see that it's actually going to deploy a number of a storage account and app service that has the application insights and application service plan. To see that in action, what you would need to do is we just need to make a change and deploy. So in my case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the Azure Bicep here, okay? And I'm going to switch the resource subscription here. Okay. I don't see that subscription coming. Okay, home. Okay, so here in resource groups, we have this bicep test RG. This is the resource group where everything get deployed. So here, as you see, I already have some files deployed, right? And if you look at deployment, it has almost 75 deployments. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go and delete, let's say, storage account here. Okay, let's go and delete that. It's a sample file, and what we are going to do is we are going to redeploy this. Okay, we're going to redeploy this and see what happens using the pipeline. So, and within the pipeline, as we mentioned, we have the jobs that are actually going to deploy this file, and then we'll look into the GitHub workflow and actions to make sure it's succeeding. So to make this deployment happen, let's see what changes we have here. We have app service change, which is fine. Parameters, we don't need this one. So I'm going to discard this change. So we have few changes here. For storage account, we change the name and and all other things are all good. Okay, so based on this, I think we are good to go. To do that, we are going to bring our terminal. Okay. And then let's look at the status. So we'll add all the files. Git commit. Let's give a name. This is the Azure Back to School demo. Let's make sure. Okay, we have. Let's make a git push. So this git push actually went to went to development environment. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make sure that, okay, we are there. We can promote this to the main. So in my case, if you look at actions here, as you see, the last one was, okay, we have deployment 21 hours ago. Okay, that one, it happened last time. So what we are going to do, we are going to promote this Azure Back to School demo. I'm going to merge this to the main. And fingers crossed here because we are experimenting here. It ideally it should work, but this is the demo. So here, what we did, we just merged it. So when we merged it, actually, what happens is we're gonna go into the actions. And here we're gonna click on deploy main site. And as you see, this workflow triggered. So if we click on this, we see that it actually has steps, linting and validating. So linting is the part where we want to make sure that our code has all these linting rules applied. And if somebody is actually going through that and trying to, push some Azure Bicep code that's not satisfying our linting rules, the rules that we put in our Bicep config file, it's gonna fail. That's kind of the beauty of it. Now validation of those code is happening, and once we pass through the validation, actual deployment should kick in. Let's refresh this. Hopefully it's not gonna fail at this moment. So deployment started. So if you click on the job itself, it will tell you what's happening, how it's signing in into the resource, and it says actual deployment of website. If something needs to be deployed, any change in the config, it's actually going to be deployed. And then creating deployment. Okay, let's go back to the summary here. But while this is going, let's do the following. Let's switch to the Azure um, portal. And in Azure portal, when we switch there, let's look at it. Okay, we are there. Let's click on deployments. All right. And this is actually 9. Okay, this should succeed because it says succeeded here. I'm coming, and if I'm refreshing this, I see that storage account is added. So if you remember, guys, we removed it. Now it's back, guys and girls. It's all back, meaning that our deployment actually succeeded, and we can see that from here, from deployment number 76. Of course, you can go and look into inputs, what were your inputs. You can look into the outputs, what was app host name. I will copy that and put that app host name here. Let's see. And yeah, it's a default website because I didn't deploy anything, so it's all working. That's great. So let's go back to so this is our job that get actually succeeded for the deployment. Our action deploying the main sites actually succeeded just 3 minutes ago. Okay, that's awesome. That means it worked, and hopefully everybody's happy with that result. So if there's any questions or something that you had still in mind that needs to be covered, please put them in the chat. I'll be more than glad to answer them. And if you need any references in terms of the code that you see, again, here are the links. But before looking into the links, what we covered, we had another dive into Azure Bicep. We understood what's the development environment there, what we need to set it up, what are the updates, and what are the new features we can use with Azure Bicep, new versions, and we looked into demos. Now, if there is anything again that you wanna in terms of links, this is the Learn Bicep GitHub that we use for coding. This is the Azure First Look video course on LinkedIn. This is the Bicep project on GitHub that's run by Microsoft. And you also have this awesome Azure Bicep references and links from community and from official resources in order to be successful with that. All right. Again, thank you everyone who joined this session. Thank you, Azure Back to School. Big shout out for Dwayne and Derek for organizing this. And here are the details. You can get connected with me. This is the URL with all social links on the right top. And plus, visit the Cloud Marathon blog. I hope you liked it. And if you have any suggestions, any ideas, please put them here on the link or in the social. Reach me from Twitter or LinkedIn. I would be glad to hear back from you. Have a great day and thank you for joining this session. Bye.